All right, let's dive into one of the most intense, high-stakes succession battles in history, the story of how Solomon actually became king of Israel. I mean, this is a masterclass in cunning political strategy where one wrong move could mean losing everything.
So, let's set the scene. You've got King David, the legendary warrior king who's now old and frail, basically on his deathbed. The whole kingdom is on edge because he hasn't officially publicly named a successor. And in the world of royal politics, that kind of power vacuum is an invitation for chaos. The question on everyone's mind is, who's going to take the throne?
And stepping right into that uncertainty is Adonijah. Now he's David's oldest surviving son, and with his older brothers out of the picture, he sees his chance. He decides, you know what, this is my moment, I'm making a move.
And he is not shy about it at all. The man literally declares, I will be king. Now here's what makes this so audacious. He almost certainly knew that God had already told David that Solomon was the chosen heir, but Adonijah just decides to ignore that and put himself forward anyway. This isn't just ambition, it's basically a full-blown revolution to usurp the throne.
You can't stage a coup alone, right? So Adonijah plays his cards very strategically. He gets some heavy hitters on his side, Joab, the commander of the entire army, and Abiathar, a very influential priest. But just as important is who he doesn't invite to the party. He deliberately snubs Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the captain of the royal guard, and, of course, the main event, his brother, Solomon. He's building a team while trying to sideline anyone who might stand in his way.
So, how do you make a power grab look legitimate? Well, Adonijah throws this massive sacrificial feast. By getting a priest involved and making it this big religious ceremony, he's trying to give his coup the appearance of divine approval, even though he knows it goes directly against God's will. It's a classic political move.
But, a secret plot this big, it's hard to keep it under wraps. The people loyal to David and Solomon figure out what's going on, and they have to scramble to come up with a countermove, and fast.
The prophet Nathan gets it immediately. He knows the stakes are incredibly high. Back then, when a new king took the throne, especially by force, the first thing he often did was eliminate any other potential rivals. This wasn't just about losing power. For Solomon and his mother Bathsheba, this was literally a matter of life and death.
So Nathan cooks up this absolutely brilliant four-step plan. Okay, first, Bathsheba is going to go in and confront King David. Her mission? To remind him of the sacred oath he swore to make Solomon king. Then, and this is the genius move, while she's still in there talking to him, Nathan himself will walk in. He'll back up her story and basically put the king on the spot. It's his perfectly timed pincer movement designed to shake the old king out of his inaction.
And guess what? It works. It works perfectly. David is spurred into action. He realizes he has to end this crisis, and he moves to make the legitimate succession happen right then and there.
David doesn't even hesitate. He reaffirms his oath to Bathsheba, declaring for everyone to hear that Solomon, and only Solomon, will be the next king. He gives the order on the spot. Anoint him as king today.
And this is where it gets really dramatic. Just imagine it. Adonijah and all his buddies are feasting, probably patting themselves on the back, thinking they've pulled it off. And then, suddenly they hear the sound of trumpets and a huge crowd roaring. And the words echoing through the city are, "Long live King Solomon." They've been completely outplayed.
The effect is instantaneous. Adonijah's little revolution just implodes. His powerful guests realize the game is up and the true king has been crowned, and they just scatter, fleeing in terror. Adonijah, now fearing for his life, makes a desperate run for the sacred altar, the one place he thinks he might find refuge from the new king's justice.
Okay, so the political thriller part is over. But with the drama settled, David uses his last moments to pass on something way more important than just the crown. He teaches Solomon what it means to be a good king.
So let's break this down, because this idea is absolutely central to everything. David reminds Solomon that a king in Israel isn't like other kings. He's not an absolute monarch. He's what we call a covenantal king. And what that means is that he rules as God's representative. He is under God's law, not above it.
This chart really makes the difference crystal clear. In all the surrounding nations, the king was the law. Whatever he said, went. But in Israel, the king was more like a vice-regent, a steward, who was supposed to be ruling on behalf of the true divine king, Yahweh. His whole job was to enforce a law that was higher than himself.
So, David's final charge, the most important piece of advice he gives his son, is this. Your success and the success of the whole kingdom depends on one thing, your obedience to God's covenant, the laws written down by Moses.
That is the bedrock of a just and prosperous reign.
But here's the reality check, right? No king in Israel's history ever lived up to this ideal perfectly. I mean, Saul, the very first king, totally failed the obedience test. David, as great as he was, had some massive moral failures. And Solomon, who starts off so wise, well, he eventually falls short too. It's this consistent pattern of flawed human leaders that always seems to point toward a hope for a future, perfect king who could finally get it right.
Now, David's not quite done. He gives Solomon one last, very specific set of instructions. And this isn't just fatherly advice. It's a command to make sure his new kingdom gets started on a rock-solid foundation of justice.
David tells Solomon he needs to deal with his old army commander, Joab. Now, at first glance, this might sound like David is just settling an old score, right? Personal revenge. But the real motivation was much, much deeper. It was about national purification, cleansing the kingdom of old, unpunished sin to create a stable foundation for the new king.
So why was this so critical? Well, according to the Old Testament law, there were 3 specific sins that were believed to literally pollute the entire land.
Those 3 big offenses were shedding innocent blood, sexual immorality, and idolatry. And Joab, he was guilty of that first one. He had murdered 2 commanders during peacetime, and that unpunished bloodshed was seen as a stain on the entire nation that had to be dealt with.
So when Solomon finally holds Joab accountable, it's actually his first real act as a true covenantal king. He isn't just taking out a political threat, he's upholding God's law. He's cleansing the land from the sins of the past, making sure his own reign can begin with justice and a clean slate.
And all of this leaves us with a really big question, doesn't it? This ancient story of backroom deals and political intrigue brings up a timeless debate about what leadership is all about. Is a lasting legacy built on clever power grabs and political maneuvering, or is it founded on a much deeper commitment to justice, to law, and to integrity? I mean, the answer to that defines not just ancient kings, but leaders everywhere, even today.